What would you do if the most feared necromancer in history died after destroying an entire continent, only to wake up as the descendant of the very hero who cut off his head? For Archimonde, this was not the end of his story. It was the beginning of a second life filled with humiliation, holy water, and a fate more ironic than he could have ever imagined. The story begins on a frozen battlefield, soaked in blood, where a 10-year war is finally coming to an end. At the center of the destruction stands the most feared man on the continent, the great necromancer Archimonde. He now kneels in defeat, with a holy sword driven straight through his heart. Around him stand the heroes who fought for a decade to stop him. But at last they have accomplished the impossible. As Archimonde struggles to breathe, he recalls how everything collapsed. During the Great Continental War, the Allied nations launched a final assault against him. While the Imperial Army battled his endless, undead legions, a special strike team infiltrated his fortress to kill him directly. Archimonde had prepared countless defenses, but one man shattered every obstacle. Standing before him is Burkle Rainland, commander of the Northern Knight Order. The knight who single-handedly cut through Archimonde's strongest forces and delivered the fatal blow. For the sake of peace, he asks Archimonde to accept his defeat. The word peace fills Archimonde with rage. He spits back that these so-called heroes ignored the suffering of millions when the plague devastated the continent. Only now, when their own lives are threatened, do they speak of justice and peace. To him, they are frauds. Even with a holy sword piercing his heart, Archimonde gathers the last of his dark power and swears to destroy humanity with his own hands. The other heroes panic, but Burkle remains calm. He reminds Archimonde that 20 million people died during the plague, and that Archimonde desecrated those corpses by raising them as undead soldiers, turning tragedy into a war that consumed the world. Archimonde knows exactly how many died. Among those millions were the people of Burkle's own hometown. This war was never about justice. It was revenge. For the first time, Burkle does not deny it. He admits that he fights for one simple reason: to protect the future of the children who will inherit this world. Those words strike Archimonde harder than any sword. For years, he was consumed by hatred and vengeance, but in Burkle's unwavering gaze, he sees a man willing to sacrifice everything for future generations. At that moment, his will to fight disappears. Dropping to his knees, he quietly tells Burkle to finish him. Burkle discards the holy sword and draws another blade. He raised it against Archimonde's neck and asks for his final words. He says, "Necromancer does not die so easily." With one clean swing, Burkle decapitates him. The heroes erupt in celebration. After 10 long years, the Great Continental War is finally over. Archimonde, the greatest evil the world has ever known, is dead, or so everyone believes. Instead of entering the afterlife, Archimonde's consciousness suddenly awakens in a luxurious mansion during a stormy night. He is no longer a necromancer. He is a baby. Two maids stand over his crib, cooing excitedly. They call him Klein Reinland, the newborn son of the Reinland family. Archimonde is completely bewildered. He tries to move and speak, but his body is tiny and uncooperative. When the maids encourage him to say, "Mama," he attempts to form his first word. But instead of calling for his mother, he instinctively called his undead army. The maids freeze in absolute terror. 15 years later, Klein Reinland has grown into a striking young man. His peaceful walk through the courtyard is abruptly interrupted when a bucket of water is dumped over his head. The culprit is Garrison Veerman, a towering priest from the Holy Order. Garrison is convinced that Archimonde's spirit still resides inside Klein's body and has dedicated himself to purifying the young master through increasingly absurd rituals. Holy water baths, endless prayer sessions, even attempted burning. Klein has endured this madness for years. Back when he was born and called for his undead army, everyone treated him like a demon, and he was locked in the monastery when he turned 3-year-old. Years later, he meets the priest from Holy Order. Since then, he despises the priest more than anyone else in the world. After escaping yet another purification ritual, Klein vents his frustration in his room. His loyal maid Erin tries to comfort him with a handmade hat and a heartfelt prayer, wishing that he will grow into a proud descendant of heroes. He throws the hat in anger. Seeing her sad, Klein feels guilty for throwing the hat away. He picked it up. At that exact moment, Garrison appears in the doorway, moved to tears by what he thought was Klein's appreciation. That guilt vanishes instantly when Erin reveals that the hat was actually knitted by Garrison. Horrified, Klein tears it to pieces on the spot. Garrison once again declares that Archimonde's evil spirit has surfaced. Then a knight named Dunkel arrives. Unlike Garrison, he believes the old rumors are ridiculous, since the Holy Order officially cleared Klein years ago. Before leaving the room, Garrison looked towards Klein and said there is always a possibility, and then left saying the next purification ritual will be on Friday. After Klein's remark on Garrison, if him being a real priest, Dunkel said, he is a proxy that might be the reason. When Maid asked what it's mean, Dunkel said the title is given to the strongest of the Holy Order. Later, while discussing the Rhineland family, Klein gazes at a portrait that hangs among the ancestral paintings. It depicts the founder of the Rhineland bloodline, the first Duke, Berkel Rhineland, the very man who killed him 200 years ago. The feared necromancer Archimonde has been reincarnated seventh descendant of the legendary hero who brought about his death. The next morning, Klein Rhineland had the same nightmare once again. In his dream, he relived the moment when Berkel Rhineland struck him down on that frozen battlefield 200 years ago. He shot up from his bed in a cold sweat, the memory still so vivid that it felt as if it had happened only yesterday. Breathing heavily, he gripped the sheets and tried to steady himself, dismissing it as nothing more than another terrible dream. As he ran his fingers through his silver hair, he muttered that no matter how much time passed, he still could not get used to this body. Suddenly, a tall figure appeared in the doorway. A deep voice remarked that young Lord Klein was quite chatty in his sleep. It was none other than Garrison. With a knowing smirk, Garrison asked whether Klein had been dreaming about his glorious days as Archimonde. Klein cursed him inwardly and reminded himself to act innocent in front of this crazy priest. He awkwardly tried to explain that he had simply been tired lately when a small figure suddenly crawled out from under the bed. It was Erin. She proudly announced that she had heard everything he said while sleeping. To make matters worse, she began reenacting his supposed threats about destroying the continent and killing everyone. Garrison watched with great interest while Klein frantically tried to silence her and denied saying anything of the sort. Before the chaos could escalate further, a polite knock sounded at the door. It was the butler, Veerman. After hearing Aaron's report, Garrison declared that today's purification would be doubled. Klein could only groan in despair as he covered Aaron's mouth, realizing she had made his situation far worse. Later, the butler informed them that a swordsmanship demonstration was about to begin and that His Grace, Heinkel Rhineland, had requested Klein's presence. This surprised him. As they walked through the grand corridors of the estate, Aaron noticed the snack and timidly asked if she could have it. The butler immediately scolded her for making such a bold request, but Klein waved him off and handed her the treat. She accepted it happily, while the butler watched in silent disapproval. Klein asked once again why he had been summoned. The butler explained that members of the branch families had arrived. Klein's mood instantly darkened at the news. In his mind, these relatives were nothing more than troublesome opportunists who always appeared when there was something to gain. As soon as he entered the hall, his expectations were confirmed. He was greeted by a gathering of smug and disdainful relatives. One loudly joked that no one should call him Klein, but Lord Archimonde instead. Another mockingly asked what it was like to spend 7 years rotting away in a monastery. Klein noted that the northern branch seemed more interested in eating than in family matters, while a beautiful girl from the western branch observed everything with bored indifference. He ignored the taunts entirely and walked past them without even a glance. This only irritated them further. Klein understood exactly why they were acting so boldly. The once proud House Rhineland was no longer as strong as it used to be. The fact that distant relatives dared to look down on a direct descendant was proof enough that the family was in decline. Soon, the swordsmanship demonstration began. Two cousins faced one another with wooden swords. One of them, Dalton Rhineland, was quickly forced back by his opponent, Dellen Rhineland. Dalton angrily accused Dellen of holding back and demanded that he fight seriously. Dellen calmly replied that the match was already over. Klein watched quietly and reflected that if there was any hope left for House Rhineland, it rested entirely on Dellen. As the eldest son of the family and Klein's older half-brother, Dellen was a once-in-a-generation genius whose talent was keeping the family's reputation alive. Refusing to accept defeat, Dalton rushed forward recklessly. At that moment, something extraordinary happened. For the first time since his reincarnation, Klein witnessed true swordsmanship. His eyes began to glow. He was no longer merely watching a duel. He was analyzing every detail. Then Dellen activated the Rhineland family's secret technique, meteor sword, his blade crashing down with explosive force and ending the match instantly. The nobles gasped in amazement, recognizing the technique as a declaration that House Reinland still retained its strength. Klein rubbed his eyes, still trying to understand what he had just experienced, when Dellen called out to him. The older brother smiled warmly and said that if he had known Klein was watching, he would have tried even harder. Klein could not help but think that Dellen was handsome, talented, and blessed with a flawless personality. Before they could speak further, Heinkel Reinland stepped forward and praised Dellen for mastering the family's secret technique. Dunkel also complimented Dellen, remarking that few knights his age would even attempt such a difficult move. Heinkel then recited the final words of Berkel Reinland, reminding his son that a knight of Rhineland must always be the greatest in the empire. Dellen bowed respectfully and promised to carry that legacy forward. Then Heinkel turned his attention to Klein. Resting a hand on his younger son's head, he stated that he still could not sense any mana from him. Klein lowered his head and apologized. Dunkel quickly offered an explanation, suggesting that Klein's lack of mana was likely due to the years he had spent isolated in the monastery. The surrounding relatives immediately began whispering that the rumors were true. Unlike his brilliant brother, Klein possessed no mana at all. Heinkel remarked that there were other paths in life besides swordsmanship, but to Klein, the words sounded less like encouragement and more like resignation. Klein told himself that he did not care about their insults. What truly angered him, the very hero who had once killed him had risked everything to protect the future, and now his descendants had become petty and rotten. As Heinkel and Dellen departed, Dalton approached Klein to vent his frustration. He mocked him for being a Rhineland who could not even wield a sword and called him a disgrace to the family. Klein remained perfectly calm. He casually asked whether sneaking around with girls behind the ballroom was Dalton's idea of honoring the family name. Dalton's confidence vanished instantly. Before he could respond, Klein stomped hard on his foot, sending him collapsing to the floor in pain. Furious, Dalton crossed the line by shouting that Klein was a bastard who did not even know his own mother. The mood changed in an instant. Klein slowly turned, his body radiating a chilling killing intent. For Klein, this was not simply about his mother. It was the open contempt these branch family members showed toward the direct bloodline that filled him with rage. Before he could act, Dunkel stepped between them and firmly warned Dalton that no further disrespect would be tolerated. Realizing he could not challenge an escort knight, Dalton retreated in humiliation. Later that night, Klein brought Dunkel to a secluded training ground and requested a steel sword. Though confused, Dunkel handed it over. Klein began swinging the blade, carefully reproducing the movements he had memorized from Dellen's demonstration. Dunkel soon realized that Klein was attempting to imitate Meteor Sword, a technique that should have been impossible for someone with no mana to perform. After sending Dunkel away, Klein closed his eyes and replayed every detail of the duel in his mind. He visualized the footwork, the timing, the arc of the blade, and the invisible current of mana that powered the technique. When he opened his eyes, mana erupted from his eyes. Dunkel, who had been about to leave, froze as an overwhelming pressure washed over the training ground. He turned in disbelief and saw Klein surrounded by mana. With a powerful shout, Klein brought the sword down and perfectly executed Meteor Sword. The attack struck a massive boulder and split it into two halves. Dunkel could only stare in utter shock. A boy with no mana had just used the Rhineland family's ultimate technique. A wide grin spread across Klein's face. He could hardly believe it. It had actually worked. The following day, Aaron stood nearby with wide eyes. Garrison was equally stunned. For once, the overconfident priest was left completely speechless. The scene then shifted to a far less glorious sight. Klein Rhineland had his head forcibly submerged in a bucket of freezing water. Garrison proudly announced that the young master's training was progressing wonderfully, noting that Klein could now remain underwater for more than a full minute. Aaron clapped excitedly and declared that her master had practically become a fish. When Klein was finally allowed to lift his head, he emerged gasping desperately for air. Garrison seriously considered replacing the bucket with an actual fish tank for future purification rituals. Klein exploded in frustration and demanded to know why this torture seemed to grow longer every day. Garrison replied calmly that the ritual had already ended, explaining that he had sensed an especially ominous aura coming from Klein's room that morning. As the servants helped him recover, Aaron gently handed him a towel. Their bizarre morning routine was interrupted when Dunkel entered carrying a letter. He announced that an invitation had arrived from Dalton Rainland. Still soaked and confused, Klein asked who that was. Dunkel reminded him that Dalton was the cousin humiliated during the swordsmanship demonstration. According to the letter, Dalton wished to apologize for his earlier behavior and invited Klein to participate in a hunting competition. Klein immediately narrowed his eyes. There was no chance this was a sincere apology. Dalton was clearly plotting something and simply needed an excuse to lure him out. When Dunkel asked whether he intended to attend, Klein gave a faint smile. Since his breakthrough on the training grounds, he had gained a powerful new advantage. By replaying Dellen's swordsmanship in his mind, Klein had discovered that he could perfectly reproduce any technique he witnessed, even once. With that knowledge, there was no reason to decline the invitation. Dunkel nodded and said he would prepare the carriage. Unfortunately, Garrison overheard the conversation and immediately insisted on accompanying them. Klein protested furiously, but the priest explained that he sensed an unusually ominous aura surrounding the day's events and refused to change his mind. Before long, the carriage was making its way toward the western forest. The rough road made the journey anything but comfortable. Aaron quickly succumbed to motion sickness and ended up resting on Garrison's lap. Seeing her pale face, Klein gently offered his own pillow and told her she should not have forced herself to come. Garrison was unexpectedly moved by this small act of kindness and briefly reflected on how much the young master had matured. Klein immediately ruined the sentimental moment by snapping that the pillow was meant for Aaron, not for the priest. As he gazed through the carriage window, Klein quietly reflected on how drastically this land had changed. The last time he saw this region, 2 centuries earlier, it had been a frozen battlefield strewn with corpses. Now it was a lush and peaceful forest. He could not help but admire how thoroughly the world had recovered. Even after all these years, he found himself acknowledging the greatness of Berkel Rainland. Their carriage eventually arrived at the Grand Cornwall estate. Klein stepped outside and was immediately struck by the sheer extravagance of the mansion. It was even more lavish than the main Rainland residence. Despite House Rainland being one of the Empire's 3 great duches, all of this wealth was being displayed for what was supposedly a simple hunting competition among children. A familiar smug voice soon called out to him. Dalton appeared, flanked by a pack of starving hunting dogs. He proudly boasted about the estate and mockingly remarked that much of its wealth had come from funds siphoned from Klein's own family. Klein paid little attention to Dalton's taunts. His focus was drawn to the dogs. They were painfully thin and clearly malnourished. Klein cut Dalton off and asked when this hunting competition had turned into an extended conversation. Dalton laughed and announced that he had prepared something special. He explained that fresh meat had been scattered throughout the mountains to lure the starving dogs into a frantic chase. Once the hounds rushed forward, Dalton drew his bow and casually shot towards them. Dalton and his companions treated the suffering animals as entertainment. Meanwhile, Aaron wandered through the grounds searching for Klein. Dalton spotted her and approached with sinister intentions. As he patted her head and made disturbing remarks, a powerful hand suddenly clamped down on his wrist. Klein stood beside him with cold eyes and quietly ordered him to let her go, warning that he would break his arm if necessary. Dalton jerked free and shoved Klein before scrambling onto a nearby horse. With a deranged grin, he challenged Klein to follow him deeper into the forest. Before giving chase, Klein handed Dunkel an ancient-looking scroll. It was a one-time signal artifact capable of sending a warning even without mana. Klein instructed Dunkel to tear the scroll immediately if Garrison disappeared unexpectedly, as that would mean something had gone terribly wrong. If the signal was activated, a crest would appear on Klein's hand and alert him to the danger. After making these preparations, Klein rode after Dalton. The pursuit led him to a moonlit clearing. There, Dalton waited calmly among the corpses of the dogs he had slaughtered. Klein dismounted and asked what kind of twisted game Dalton was playing now. Dalton drew his sword and revealed the true purpose of the invitation. Klein was the final prey in today's hunt. Dalton gleefully explained that he intended to kill Klein, present his severed head to Dellen Rainland, and prove that the direct line of House Rainland was powerless. At his signal, armed men emerged from the shadows. Archers raised their bows, surrounding Klein from every direction. Dalton declared that once Klein was dead, the branch families would eventually seize the entire estate. Yet instead of fear, Klein began to laugh. The sound echoed through the forest and sent a chill down everyone's spine. Dalton stared in confusion, unable to understand why his cousin was laughing in the face of death. Klein finally composed himself and explained that he found it amusing to watch an arrogant child act so confidently without any idea who he was provoking. He reminded Dalton that this family and this land had been built upon sacrifices greater than the boy could ever understand. Then a vast torrent of turquoise energy erupted from Klein's body. Dalton screamed in terror. He knew Klein possessed no mana. So how could he be using such overwhelming power? Klein calmly corrected him. This was not mana. This was Magi. As Dalton's mercenaries struggled against the crushing pressure, Klein began an ancient incantation. He called upon the forgotten spirits, buried by the passage of time, and commanded them to rise once more. Dalton's sanity began to unravel as he recognized the name that had once terrified the entire continent, Archimonde. An entire legion of undead warriors emerged from the soil. Standing at their center, Klein gave a single command: devour them all. Dalton's hired mercenaries could hardly believe what they had just heard. Yet standing before them was a silent army of skeletons. The men stared in confusion, struggling to understand what they were seeing. One of the undead slowly turned its head, and its eyes sent a chill through the entire group. Dalton Rainland stood frozen, his mind unable to process the situation. But the mercenaries quickly forced themselves to laugh, mocking the skeletal warriors as nothing more than walking piles of bones. Klein Rainland remained silent, looking down at them as though they were foolish children, babbling, without understanding their fate. Dalton finally regained some of his confidence and dismissed the skeletons as worthless trash. One of his men boasted that he had destroyed hundreds of skeletons before, though he admitted these looked somewhat unusual. Others joked about taking a skull home as a trophy. With a dramatic gesture, Dalton ordered his men to eliminate the undead and clear a path. Archers and crossbowmen immediately raised their weapons. At Dalton's command, a storm of arrows and bolts shot through the air toward Klein. The projectiles raced toward him and seemed certain to strike, but they never reached their target. Every arrow halted in mid-flight and clattered harmlessly against a wall of black shields. As the dust settled, Dalton's triumphant smile vanished. The skeletal warriors had moved in perfect unison, raising massive dark shields to form an impenetrable barrier around their master. Klein allowed himself a faint smile. 2 centuries had passed, so it was no surprise that no one recognized these soldiers. Panic spread among the mercenaries as they shouted in disbelief, insisting that the skeletons had not been carrying shields moments earlier. Klein calmly explained that their confusion would make sense if these were ordinary skeletons. These were not common undead. They were Archimonde's personal soldiers. Klein addressed Berkel Rainland, the hero who gave his life to protect the North, and of the descendants who had disgraced that noble legacy. Then Klein gave a single order: charge. The undead legion surged forward with terrifying speed. Dalton could only stammer in disbelief. Skeletons were not supposed to move like this. His mercenaries fell into complete chaos as the wave of bone and steel crashed into them. The first man died instantly. What followed was not a battle, it was an execution. The terrified men quickly realized they were hopelessly outmatched. Then Klein quietly issued another command. He ordered his second crossbow unit to surround the enemy. Hidden among the trees, more skeletal soldiers appeared, each armed with enormous bone-forged crossbows. The remaining mercenaries screamed in terror as they spotted the undead archers. Klein spoke one cold word: fire. A rain of bolts tore through the forest and struck the fleeing men from every direction. Dalton gritted his teeth in frustration. These creatures were nothing like the weak skeletons he had encountered before. In a desperate attempt to regain control, Dalton ordered his surviving men to abandon their bows and engage in close combat, but no one listened. The mercenaries were too consumed by fear. Realizing he was on his own, Dalton swung wildly at the nearest skeleton and managed to decapitate it. For a brief moment, he laughed in triumph and shouted that the undead could be defeated if their heads were removed. His celebration lasted only seconds. The headless skeleton continued moving. Before Dalton's horrified eyes, it picked up its severed skull and calmly reattached it to its neck. Dalton stood speechless. Klein observed with quiet satisfaction. Most people believed destroying a skeleton's head was enough to kill it, but these warriors were spiritual bodies created through Magi. They did not perish so easily. This was the same power Archimonde once used to conquer the continent. Klein knew that, with his current body, summoning 11 of these soldiers was his absolute limit. But as he looked at the terrified mercenaries, he understood that 11 were more than enough. The last traces of resistance disappeared, and the battlefield became a scene of pure panic. Far away, at the quiet estate, Garrison relaxed beside a fountain while telling stories to Aaron. At that very moment in the forest, another mercenary was being skewered by an undead. Back in the clearing, Dalton refused to surrender. He destroyed another skeleton's head, only to watch it regenerate once again. Then a realization struck him. The skeletons were not the true problem, Klein was. If he could kill the summoner, the undead army should disappear. Ignoring the surrounding skeletons, Dalton charged straight at Klein with everything he had left. He raised his sword high, determined to end the battle with a single strike. But just before the blade descended, Klein's eye released Magi, his unique ability activated. Dalton froze when he recognized the stance. It was the Rainland family's secret art, Meteor Sword. With flawless precision, Klein mirrored the technique exactly. Dalton's mind could not comprehend what he was seeing. How could the cousin he mocked as worthless wield the family's ultimate sword technique? Klein stepped forward. In a calm and merciless voice, he informed Dalton that a peaceful death was a privilege he would not receive. His judgment had begun. With one final cough, Dalton Rainland collapsed onto the forest floor. As Klein Rainland looked down at his defeated cousin, he reflected that Dalton had been correct about one thing. The most effective way to defeat a necromancer is to eliminate the caster. That exact weakness had once led to the fall of Archimonde himself. The Magi flowing through Klein's body was immensely powerful, but it still carried the same fatal flaw. If the user died, every undead servant would disappear. Ironically, the very thing shielding him from that weakness was the blood of heroes. Klein found a strange beauty in that fact. The power of his greatest enemies had become the source of his own strength. At that moment, he fully embraced his new identity as Klein Rainland. Dalton lay on the ground, barely conscious and utterly confused by Klein's words. His thoughts faded as darkness swallowed him whole. When he opened his eyes again, he found himself in a world of absolute blackness. Cold metal restraints bound both his wrists and ankles. As the darkness slowly receded, Dalton discovered he was strapped to a terrifying chair lined with sharp spikes. Panic flooded his mind as he struggled to understand where he was. A calm voice echoed through the void. Standing before him was Archimonde. The legendary necromancer informed Dalton that he had died and entered the afterlife. More specifically, an afterlife personally created by Archimonde himself. Dalton stared in disbelief, unable to process the absurdity of the situation. With the cold authority of a judge, Archimonde began listing Dalton's sins. He spoke of the starving dogs Dalton had tortured for amusement, the cruel games he called hunting, and the twisted delight he took in shooting helpless animals with arrows. Dalton screamed that it was all nonsense and demanded to be released. But in the middle of his outburst, a horrifying realization struck him. He clearly remembered the pain of Klein's blade, cutting him down. If he had died, then this place could only be real. Archimonde calmly explained that Dalton was already dead. This was simply karma, a place where he would experience the same suffering he had inflicted on others. Dalton's refusal to believe it changed nothing. Behind Archimonde, spectral hounds began to emerge from the darkness. Their glowing eyes burned with vengeance. These were the spirits of the very dogs Dalton had abused in life. The color drained from Dalton's face. Archimonde instructed him to listen carefully to the cries of the creatures he had tormented. At that command, the ghostly hounds lunged forward and tore into him. Dalton's screams echoed endlessly through the void. He begged for mercy, but in this realm, there was none. This was a hell created by his own cruelty. Back in the real world, Dalton's body lay motionless on the forest floor. His judgment was complete. The forest finally fell silent. One of Klein's skeletal warriors let out a harsh cry, drawing his attention. Klein thanked the loyal soldier for carrying out his orders flawlessly. As a reward, he declared that he would release the soul trapped within the bones and grant it true rest. The skeleton began to dissolve into beautiful turquoise particles that drifted into the night sky. Watching the spirit disappear, Klein wondered about the meaning of death itself. If shattered bones marked true death, then why had Archimonde been brought back to life? What purpose did this second chance serve? His thoughts were interrupted by an unfamiliar voice from the trees. A cloaked man remarked that he had not expected to see young Master Klein practicing necromancy. Klein immediately turned, every instinct on high alert. When he demanded the stranger's identity, the man answered that it did not matter, because Klein would not remember him anyway. Green energy erupted from the stranger's hand and flowed into the corpses of Dalton's mercenaries. One by one, the dead men's eyes flashed open with eerie green light. Their bodies jerked to life and began rising from the ground. Klein recognized the technique at once: corpse revival. The stranger was a necromancer. The mysterious man smirked and commented that although Dalton had been a disappointment, his mercenaries would serve as excellent corpses. Far away at the estate, Erin called for Dunkel to join her and Garrison Veerman, who was entertaining her with stories about Klein's childhood. Dunkel, however, was in no mood to laugh. He remained focused on the signal scroll Klein had entrusted to him. 3 hours had passed since Klein and Dalton entered the forest. Unable to wait any longer, Dunkel prepared to ride out, only to be blocked by 2 guards. Their excuses quickly aroused his suspicion when he noticed the bull crest of the Cornwell family on their armor. He realized they were part of the conspiracy. With an icy warning, Dunkel identified himself as the commander of the Rhineland family's night order and Klein's personal escort. The guards immediately backed down. Before leaving, Dunkel instructed Erin to return to the mansion with the priest. Erin then revealed a startling detail. Garrison had already disappeared without a word, and had looked unusually serious when he left. Dunkel froze. He remembered Klein's warning that if the priest vanished, it meant something had gone terribly wrong. Without hesitation, he mounted his horse, tore the signal scroll with his teeth, and raced toward the forest. Back in the clearing, Klein faced a new crisis. After the battle with Dalton, his Magi reserves were completely exhausted. He could no longer use necromancy. The enemy Necromancer sensed his advantage and ordered the reanimated corpses to kill Klein. As the undead advanced, Klein clenched his fist and smirked. The crest from the signal scroll flared to life on his hand. He mocked the stranger for assuming that all necromancers were the same. The enemy necromancer barely had time to react before a colossal pillar of golden light engulfed the battlefield. This was not dark magic. It was divine power. The resurrected corpses were instantly purified and reduced to dust. At the center of the holy radiance stood Garrison Veerman. Far from his usual ridiculous behavior, the priest now resembled a true inquisitor. As the light faded, the stunned necromancer demanded to know who he was. Garrison introduced himself with absolute authority. He was Garrison Veerman, a proxy of the Holy Order, and he had come to pass judgment upon the darkness. The enemy necromancer could only stare in horror. A proxy of the Holy Order had appeared. The story briefly explains just how terrifying these individuals truly are. Known as the proxies, they are the Pope's personal executioners, living weapons feared across the continent. Each one possesses enough strength to destroy an entire fortress alone. Among all the forces of the Holy Order, they are considered the absolute strongest, and standing before Klein Rhineland was one of those monsters, and assured Klein that everything was under control now that he had arrived. The undead continued charging forward mindlessly, driven only by dark magic. Unfortunately for them, they were rushing directly toward a walking catastrophe. Garrison wielded his holy book less like a sacred text and more like a blunt weapon. He smashed a zombie's face apart with overwhelming force before tearing through the undead horde like a storm of divine judgment. He promised to cleanse them of their sins, then immediately demonstrated exactly what he meant by obliterating another zombie's head with a holy punch. The remaining undead made one final desperate rush, hoping to overwhelm him through sheer numbers. Garrison calmly planted his feet and launched himself forward. His glowing fists collided with the horde head-on, instantly destroying everything in his path. To him, this was both mercy and judgment. The enemy necromancer watched in complete disbelief. Why was a proxy here? How could one man possess this much power? Within moments, his entire undead army had been wiped out. Panic finally overtook him. Realizing the plan had completely collapsed, he attempted to flee, but escape was impossible. The necromancer turned and found Garrison gripping him by the head with one hand. The man screamed in pure terror as Garrison informed him that the prayer was not yet finished. Bloodshot tears streamed down the necromancer's face, while Garrison told him to be grateful for the judgment he was about to receive. Then, in the name of the light, Garrison tightened his grip and crushed the man's skull in an explosion of blood. Klein watched the entire scene unfold with visible unease. A bead of sweat slid down his face as Garrison calmly approached him afterward. The priest placed a blood-stained hand on Klein's shoulder, causing him to tense instantly. Garrison explained that he sensed necromantic energy and rushed to the scene immediately. Then his gaze sharpened. The overwhelming aura of necromancy he detected did not seem to belong to the dead necromancer lying nearby. Klein's blood ran cold. He could feel the killing intent hidden beneath Garrison's calm expression. One wrong move would get him killed. Before the situation could escalate further, a familiar voice shouted Klein's name from the distance. It was Dunkel arriving on horseback. The tension finally broke. At the same moment, the exhaustion from overusing his powers hit Klein all at once. Blood dripped from his mouth as his body began giving out beneath him. Dunkel rushed across the battlefield and caught Klein just before he collapsed. Then Dunkel asked the question that mattered most. Where was Dalton? Klein answered with chilling simplicity. He killed him. The story then jumped forward to the aftermath of the incident. Inside a grand hall, the matter of Dalton's death was being debated among the nobles. A furious hand slammed onto the table. The man causing the disturbance was Count Delkin Conwell, Dalton's father. He absolutely refused to believe his son could have done anything wrong and angrily accused Klein of framing him. Presiding over the gathering was Heinkel Reinland. The Duke calmly explained that Klein's testimony had remained completely consistent throughout the investigation. Then he revealed the first piece of evidence. A document bearing the Conwell family seal showed that 20 private mercenaries had been dispatched around the exact time Klein and Dalton disappeared. It became obvious that Dalton had indeed been planning something. Count Conwell immediately began sweating. Internally, he cursed his men for leaving behind evidence. Still, he refused to back down. He argued that even if Dalton had been involved in a conspiracy, it made no sense for Klein to have killed him. Other nobles began agreeing with him. After all, Dalton was a trained knight, while Klein was widely known as someone incapable of using mana. Seeing an opportunity, the Count shifted tactics entirely. If he could not defend Dalton, then he would destroy Klein's credibility instead. He began attacking Klein personally, bringing up the strange rumors surrounding Klein's late mother, Archduchess Claire. Then he mocked Klein's childhood, reminding everyone that the boy once ran around claiming to be Archimonde himself. Before the Count could continue, a calm voice interrupted him. Everyone turned toward the staircase. Klein slowly descended into the hall, wearing an elegant suit. Completely unfazed by the accusations surrounding him, he coolly summarized the events. Dalton hired mercenaries, attempted to kill him, and died in self-defense. Klein also added that another necromancer later appeared and reanimated the corpses before Father Garrison intervened. The Count desperately insisted that everything was a lie. A dangerous smile spread across Klein's face. He calmly asked whether the rumors about him being Archimonde were lies too. The Count froze, unable to respond. At that moment, Klein silently reaffirmed the vow he made. After killing Dalton, he would rebuild the Rhineland family with his own hands, and he would never allow parasites to stain its legacy again. Just as the tension reached its peak, a sharp knock echoed through the hall. The massive doors opened, revealing a brilliant light from outside. A new figure entered alongside two subordinates. It was Laya. Klein recognized her immediately. She was present during the earlier swordsmanship demonstration. The nobles began whispering, confused about why the commander of the Fauvern family's knight order had appeared here. Heinkel explained that Dalton previously served under her order, giving her the authority to attend the hearing. As attendants removed her cloak, Laya's sharp gaze swept across the room, before stopping directly on Klein. The two stared at each other silently. Then Laya calmly requested a private conversation with him. Klein was caught completely off guard. Why did she want to speak with him specifically? After a brief pause, Heinkel allowed it, as long as they did not take too much time. Klein reluctantly followed her, though his thoughts quickly began racing. There were only a few possible reasons for this meeting. She wanted to verify something. She suspected him, or she intended to test him. Whatever her reason, Klein had already decided to use every opportunity to his advantage. The attendants guided them into a private room before shutting the heavy doors behind them. The instant they were alone, Leia's demeanor completely changed. She stepped forward without hesitation and closed the distance between them in a single motion. Klein completely froze. Meanwhile, Laya looked entirely serious as she quietly asked him a question. Could she touch him?